Okay, I know this sounds silly, but it's probably the easiest way to start, is just to tell me what happened. And then, so you can start what makes the most sense to you, and we'll just work our way through, and I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions just to kind of clarify.
Sure.
So I know you talked to the initial patrol officer.
And he just got information. He didn't say anything.
So yeah, if you can just kind of tell me kind of what happened. It sounds like some of this may have started last night or something along those lines.
Right.
So start where you think it makes the most sense.
Okay, so,
I told you, it's a crazy question.
Well, so we moved into this house 3 weeks ago because he offered to get me a house here where all my family is. So we were in Houston. And so he's like, we had decided to separate or whatever. So he's like, well, I'll pay for a house for you and for JJ and whatever, because he's all about JJ. He's never about Tylee, but he's all about JJ. Because we adopted him together. He's his great nephew. We adopted him as a baby. And so we adopted him as a baby, and so we've been raising him together. And he travels all the time for business, so he's used to just going back and forth. So he's always gone like Monday through Friday. So he came when we first moved in and brought me stuff from Houston, like a U-Haul. And then he hasn't been back. But it's all these threats on my phone all the time, you know, like whatever, all these things. And then he told me...
What kind of threats?
Just... You'd have to read them to see, but he's always mad at me, right? And he doesn't want a divorce, but I don't like him and don't want to deal with him, so that's just how it is. So we married for 14 years, we dealt with it for 14 years, of him being horrible to her. Like, he gets in huge fights with her, a lot of things. But anyway, so he said, I'm coming Wednesday night, all of a sudden. I want to see JJ. And I told him, I said, I will never keep JJ from you. You can come see him whenever you want to. Come take him to school, whatever. Like, I'm not going to do that.
All right. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, okay. Look, some simple things here. I would suggest she's minimized rather than maximized. What do I mean like that? Well, she's taking up as minimal room as she can rather than maximizing the room that she takes up, the space that she takes up. We'll see her minimize even more during this. In fact, we'll see her minimize over this in a way that I've never seen before. A baseline change, which is probably the biggest I've ever seen in my life. Abdomen is concave as well, tucked in, again, protective. Blink rate is high, I would say, even for somebody being interviewed in this way. So blink rate is already, I think, quite high as a baseline. She's forward in her chair though, so she's interested. She's paying attention. Though that could be something to do with the concave nature of her abdomen as well. Curled in here for protection. Very active hands, very active descriptors, lots of symmetry, but lots of asymmetry as well. One last thing on this, that emphasis on 14 years. Seems that she wants some kind of approval around that, or certainly wants us to pay a lot of attention to this idea of 14 years. Greg, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, Mark, I love the fact you start off with baseline because we're going to see fantastic baseline deviations from this. And I always say the organism does what made the organism successful. This woman is a queen of what she does. And we're going to watch her through here walk down. She doesn't do chaff and redirect. She does chaff, and disparage victim. We're going to watch it. It goes on and on and on. If it was chaff and redirect, she'd be giving you something to go after. She isn't. She's just talking until you let her go the next path, and she disparages the victim. For those of you who are read method folks, guess what? She's telegraphing what she wants to hear from you. So that's a great opportunity for us to talk about read method as we work through here. There's a really smart guy I know who talks about planes and talks about passion planes and grotesque plane and truth plane. Watch the planes in this woman. She starts off locked down. These barriers are beautiful. She's got barriered, has her hands between her knees. And you can tell, I'm going to start by calling her Big Lori, Little Lori as we go through this whole thing. It's a very different personality. She's apprehensive until she finds out what to expect. And in the 80s, there was a song called 'Cause I'm Blonde. I have a feeling this woman has made her lifestyle on that 'Cause I'm Blonde. And in the lyrics to that, the woman would say, BLO, you know what I mean. She would finish no sentences. She would just trail off. And we see that a lot from Lori. She starts off with front of mouth talking and increased blank rates, which we indicate means stress. And she's being solicitous to the person who's talking to her. Then when she realizes what's going on, the sides of her mouth are pulled down, her forehead's up and nodding. That's all intake, data intake. And that's a frown of understanding is all it is. But when she tells her, start where it makes most sense, watch that blink rate fade. Boom. And then she goes to M. She's delaying confrontation there. She leans and eye blocks and gives some nervous laughter. And we're going to see that a few times in this thing. This is probably one of the weirdest ones we've seen to yet. And I think, Mark, you might be right. Baseline deviation, buckle up. This is a good one. Scott, what do you got?
All right. This may be my very favorite one because we're looking at a straight up, in my opinion, psychopath. And I'm going to go through why I think so, why my hypothesis that she is one as we go through this. Mark, you nailed it. I don't know what else to say about that. Let's see. She laughs in every video except two, except number 3 and number 4. She laughs in every one of them. We're talking about someone who has just seen her ex-husband killed or was there when he was killed, 2 or 3 hours ago? And she's so calm. Everything is just fine. It's like she's just come. It sounds like she's at a teacher's meeting. It sounds like one of her kids got in trouble and she's down there talking about that, but the kid didn't get that much trouble. But they said, come in, we need to talk about this. This is what this sounds like. The interrogator does such a fantastic job with this because what a psychopath does is they try to mimic the person they're talking to get to engage them. We see a lot of romancing here where she tries to mimic the interrogator to get the interrogator to like her. It's fantastic. But the interrogator, I think she knows what's going on because some of these things, as we go through this, I'll point out some of the things where you go, she understands what's happening here because she's asking this or she's doing this. She does some classic, like you were saying, Greg, read technique stuff right down the line almost. And she does a great job at those. You can tell she's done it 100 times. But Lori hasn't had a chance to structure her story yet. So she goes through that. She's taking her time. She laughs a little bit too much, but we're going to see her even though she's tucked in and down. We're going to see her go lower and lower and lower and turtling. Where finally we're going to see her hands below her knees on this. When we get toward the end, it is something else to see this. In this case, her illustrators are fluid, but they're fairly low. So she's not showing a lot of confidence with what she's talking about. I know the fellow you're talking about, Greg, for the truth playing thing. He's a friend of mine, known for quite a while. And he does a whole thing how I'm sure which he would go through that if he were on here about the differences in those and how we're seeing those changes as we go along. And then she's creating the reason this happened. When she's asked the question, she's recreating the reason this happened, not what happened. So let's talk about what happened. She doesn't tell what happened. She tells the reason it happened. So this is just bells and whistles of watch out, something's up here. And keep in mind, she takes time to create this story because she hasn't had time to structure it yet. I think when she and her brother planned this, if it was a plan, everything went as they expected, but it's not she doesn't have her story ready yet. She hasn't gotten to where this, and this. She's really laid back about the whole thing. That's the scary part about this. If in fact she was a psychopath, none of this would bother her. Listen to what she's talking about. Listen to the questions she's being asked and look at how she responds. Look at her body language overall. And this is basic body language stuff we'll be looking at. So, Chase, what do you got?
You all nailed a lot of the body language here, but I think the interviewer does a great job. She's saying, start where you think it makes the most sense. This is a great strategy in interviews because it allows the other person to pick what they think is relevant, and it avoids leading them into a hard starting point. And this lets you know if they're going to go through a rehearsed story or not, just how they respond to this one question. And right away, you're seeing something called GHT, gestural hemispheric tendency. Whether or not we gesture one side positive, one side negative, she uses her right hand like this and gestures off to her right to talk about anything negative, and her left side is used for positive topics while she's discussing the negative relationship with one child and the positive and loving relationship with the other. You're going to see this. This type of information can help us in a lot of ways. But most importantly, we're going to use this to see where she gestures in the future about certain issues so we can see how she feels about them. And later in the interview, an interviewer can move toward that spot and start gesturing a certain way to change or maybe change the way she perceives something as positive or negative, depending on how you want to frame it. And no one who's being threatened will gloss over being threatened unless they're either lying or trying to protect the person who did it. So she uses the word whatever to describe these threats. And then when she's asked about the threat, she displays this uncommon hesitancy before answering, just lacks the ability to answer just a reasonable question. And at the end of this, you'll see more of this left and right GHT data coming up. When she's saying horrible to her, she's using her right hand again. I think it's her right. Yeah. Her right hand again, and even pointing in that direction with her thumb. And this is a very valuable data to an interviewer, but you can use this in any conversation that you ever have to identify these critical indicators like this. And I think just this one clip, I alone, and not even including these other guys here, I could do probably a 3-hour training on this one clip. Like we could spend a day dissecting this thing.
Easily.
Yeah, that's all I got.
The eyewitness is you.
Okay, I know this sounds silly, but it's probably the easiest way to start is just to tell me what happened. And then so you can start what makes the most sense to you, and we'll just work our way through, and I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions just to kind of clarify.
Sure.
So I know you talked to the initial patrol officer.
And he just got information. He didn't say anything.
So yeah, if you can just kind of tell me kind of what happened. It sounds like some of this may have started last night or something along those lines.
Right.
So start where you think it makes the most sense.
Okay, so,
I told you, it's a crazy question.
Well, so we moved into this house 3 weeks ago because he offered to get me a house here where all my family is. So we were in Houston. And so he's like, we had decided to separate or whatever. So he's like, well, I'll pay for a house for you and for JJ and whatever, because he's all about JJ. He's never about Tylee, but he's all about JJ. Right? Because we adopted him together. He's his great nephew. We adopted him as a baby. And so we adopted him as a baby, and so we've been raising him together. And he travels all the time for business, so he's used to just going back and forth. So he's always gone like Monday through Friday. So he came when we first moved in and brought me stuff from Houston, like a U-Haul, and then he hasn't been back. But it's all these threats on my phone all the time, you know, like whatever, all these things. And then he told me...
What kind of threats?
Just... You'd have to read them to see, but he's always mad at me, right? And he doesn't want a divorce, but I don't like him and don't want to deal with him, so that's just how it is. So we married for 14 years, we've dealt with it for 14 years, of him being horrible to her. Like, he gets in huge fights with her, a lot of things. But anyway, so he said, I'm coming Wednesday night, all of a sudden. I want to see JJ. And I told him, I said, I will never keep JJ from you. You can come see whenever you want to. Come take him to school, whatever. Like, I'm not going to do that.
If you like this video, get the full body language breakdown and analysis on our main channel by clicking this video right here.